Alan, hey, thanks for coming. I appreciate you coming down from New York. Alan's here to present for our Lunch, Learn, and Network series with Wildmor Realty. Alan, we're here today to talk about FASB and IASB changes, and how'd you get involved in this?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Shane. Looking forward to meeting the group today and speaking in front of them. I got involved in this project about 6 years ago, 2010, after they released the first exposure draft. I saw this as a game changer for the real estate industry and my business in particular, the software industry. So in 2010, when they released the first exposure draft, I hooked up with a guy named Bill Bosco, who has since become a very good friend of mine. He is a working committee member on FASB. He's been involved with the project from day one. He is a equipment leasing expert, spent most of his life at Citibank, an accounting guru. I'm the real estate guy. And Bill and I got together and we went through the exposure draft. We said, there's a lot of white papers out there, a lot of people talking about the macro view of this whole project and whatnot. And Bill and I sat down and we said, let's actually capitalize a lease. Let's figure out what is it going to take to actually put a lease on the balance sheet. Let's think about all the different scenarios that we have in commercial real estate that we negotiate. How is this all going to work? It's taken us 6 years to get to this point and get through all those scenarios, but we are there now.
So Alan, talk about how this is going to affect companies and what they're going to have to do to prepare for it and how that's going to affect their workload.
Okay, so it's going to be a ton of work for corporate real estate departments to be compatible with the new accounting rules. Nobody in the history of commercial real estate has ever capitalized an operating lease before. In a very short period of time, every operating lease on your books is going to have to be capitalized.
Both old and new leases, right?
Old and new leases, absolutely. So there's going to be a lot of education that's needed because nobody really knows how to do it. It is a process. It is a lot of work. There's new information that has to be abstracted. There's new calculations that have to be made. There's a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made. But the biggest impact on this is going to be how it impacts the balance sheet of a company.
Let's talk about the impact on the balance sheet. What kind of things are real estate finance executives going to face when it comes to minimizing the impact on the balance sheet?
Okay, that's going to be a huge effect on the balance sheet. I played the video for you in our training session earlier, which talked about how 88% of all investors today are looking at the balance sheet. They feel there's a recession coming, not necessarily in 2016. Most investors have it pegged in 2017, but it's all about balance sheet strength. They're looking at liquidity and leverage levels. So while real estate doesn't have all that much to do with liquidity, the leases project at least doesn't have that much to do with liquidity. Certainly leverage levels. We're looking at the amount of debt that a company takes on to finance its assets, okay? So we're putting all of these operating leases on the balance sheet. Lucky if you're a FASB company because it doesn't go on as debt. IASB companies, not so lucky, it all does go on as debt. The big picture here is that as a corporate real estate executive, your job today is to optimize the real estate portfolio to minimize the impact on the balance sheet. To do that, it's all about really understanding how we capitalize leases, the good clauses, the bad clauses, and how they affect the balance sheet. Not only for the new leases you're going to sign, which are all going to be capitalized, but the existing leases that you have today. How do we go back in and look at our current portfolio, figure out which leases are good, bad, and which ones we should be renegotiating to minimize that impact on the balance sheet. A lot of people hear the schedule isn't until, for public companies, it's not until January of 2019, the first reporting period, but they're mandated by the SEC to provide 3 years of P&L and 2 years of balance sheet. So what that means is that any leases on your books January of 2017 are going to be capitalized. So the deadline's a lot closer than you think.
So Alan, what's the most important thing companies can do to optimize their balance sheet today?
Today. The most important part of this right now, up front, what you're going to be doing today to prepare for this is education. You need to understand the process of capitalizing a lease, the calculations, what goes into it. You need to understand the good clauses, the bad clauses. Once you've got that, then you understand how this is all going to affect the balance sheet. So the goal is to capitalize the least amount of rent possible. That is the number one most important thing that we're trying to do to optimize our real estate portfolio. Understanding the calculations is what's going to let you do that. So understanding what rent is subject to being capitalized and what the deductions you can take on. Getting that number down to the lowest amount that we're going to put on the balance sheet, that's the most important thing that you can do today.
So we're on the eve of FASB announcing. It's February 24th, 2016. FASB is going to announce tomorrow. It's Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve for us.
You're a real estate guy. What would you do first to prepare for this?
Well, definitely, the only way that you can actually learn how to capitalize leases is by sitting with a piece of software that does this, that has this functionality built in, entering a deal, putting in the variables to capitalize the lease, printing out a report, taking your calculator, and walking through it step by step and making sure that you understand the calculations. Of course, if you're using ProLease ProCalc software, you're welcome to call our tech support line if you have any questions, and we can walk you through the process. But that is the only way that you are going to learn actually how to capitalize a lease and the impact of it. When you can change different variables and see what the impact is on the reports that are generated, you're going to start to get a good understanding of how the negotiation of the lease is going to have to change going forward. This is a game changer for our industry. We will never negotiate deals the same way as we did in the past.
As we talk about allocating resources toward this and knowing what it's going to cost, each company, each real estate, budgeting for time, budgeting for personnel, what are you thinking as far as allocation for this?
So I would estimate that it's going to be somewhere between 3 to 5 hours for each lease that you currently have. There's a re-abstracting process. You're going to have to go back into the lease, look for new variables that you didn't previously have to abstract. You're going to have to put them into your lease administration database. You're going to have to create the capitalization schedules for each one. So after the process of education, it's still going to be 3 to 5 hours per lease of extra work for the corporate real estate department.
So Alan, how do public and private companies differ in their strategies going forward?
Excellent question. Okay, I would say that there is not that much of a difference between public and private companies and their strategy. If you look at the criteria for who it is that has to be capitalizing their operating leases, it's more a function of anybody who has to generate audited financial statements is going to have to put all their operating lease liability on the balance sheet. So it's not so much private or public companies, it's everybody who has to generate audited financial statements. It is going to be a lot of work. This is not just real estate leases, it's also equipment leases, forklifts, computers, cars, boats, planes, trains, everything. So it's not just the real estate department, it's also the equipment leasing department. A lot of work.
Motorcycles?
Motorcycles too. Motorcycles too, as we discussed before, okay? I think there's going to be a bigger difference for IASB versus FASB companies because the way that you capitalize leases for IASB and FASB is actually different, two different methodologies. So they could have different strategies with that. Really quickly, operating lease liability is not considered debt for a FASB company, whereas for an IASB company, it's all capitalized the same way, capital leases and operating leases, and it's going to show up on their balance sheet as debt.
Why are we capitalizing leases?
Another excellent question. I think it's important to understand that there are two types of leases, capital leases and operating leases. Capital leases have always been on the balance sheet, operating leases never on the balance sheet. That's what this whole leases project is all about, is we're putting operating lease liability on the balance sheet. The leases project began back in 2006 after Enron and WorldCom imploded. The SEC investigated operating lease accounting and realized that off-balance sheet transactions had a loophole in it that made it very difficult for investors and lenders and analysts to understand a company's true future liabilities. And this is important information that they need to make good business decisions. So the SEC mandated that FASB and the IASB work together to start to put operating leases on the balance sheet. That, in a nutshell, is how we got to where we are today.